Cool.
Okay. And there we are.
All right, and I'll speak through my phone. Yikes.
Okay, let's see. I've got an MP3 file up, and I have this up as well. So there we go.
Okay, great.
Okay, do you mind if I'll air this later today, this afternoon, and I just want to give my usual radio introduction. You can edit it out however you want, but I'm just going to do. It'll probably take 10 seconds. Here it is. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is AM 1400 KVFD, the voice for Dodge. I'm Michael Devine, and joining me now from San Diego is Jenna Levy, and we're going to talk to her today about climate change. Okay, that's good. I've done my thing. Is there anything you need to do, or shall we just dive in?
No, we can just dive right in.
Okay, and here we go. Okay, first of all, Jenna, where are you at today?
So right now I'm down in Carlsbad, which is a little bit north of San Diego in California.
Sure. And you go to university there. What's the name of the university?
So I'm actually an online student. I go to a school in Colorado called Western Colorado State, but everything's online. So I chose to live in California while I'm going through grad school.
Okay. By the way, Jenna is the niece of Scott Buchanan, who's a lawyer up in Kossuth County, in Algona to be exact. And of course, that's where her mother's from. Jenna grew up in Colorado. But a lot of people know Scott and the Buchanan family. They're a great family, by the way. Your grandfather, Russ, I don't know how much contact you had with him over the years, but he was a great man, just a terrific guy. Anyway, we're going to talk about climate change. And as I recall from our earlier conversations, you want to know why there are so many climate change deniers, or when presented with information showing the proof of climate change, a lot of people just say no. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. We have a class assignment to kind of discuss that with someone and then sort of figure out if we can find a pattern to what really is the basis for people not believing in climate change science.
So this is kind of reach out to a redneck portion of the class, huh?
For the people who at least have a different viewpoint than I do.
Yes, probably so. Do you mind if I offer a theory, a hypothesis right off the bat? Because everything I'm going to tell you from now on is based on this. My deal is communication. I've studied communication a lot over the years. Obviously, I'm in the communication field. And what I really am is not a talk radio host. I'm an advertising salesman. And I give people what they want. And sometimes you thrill them and sometimes you scare them. Why? The reason that there's so much resistance to climate change is the oil and gas industry has much better communicators than the professors who are talking about climate change. Would you rather listen to a guy like Rush Limbaugh, who, by the way, makes $56 million a year? I know he's kind of the ogre of some people on the university campuses. Would you rather hear Rush Limbaugh explains things like very few people can? Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton were the only two major national figures who could communicate as well as Rush Limbaugh. But he would explain why climate change legislation is bad in terms that people can understand. Here we have a professor saying climate change is real, and if you don't radically alter your life, the planet's going to burn up and you're going to die. Over here is Rush, who says, if we beat back these liberals, then you'll have a job. What they're offering is no job, no house, and no future. Which of those two things would you care to believe, Jenna? You know, would you care to pay attention to the professor who says, you're going to be out of work a few years, but don't worry, wind jobs are coming, or solar panel jobs are coming. It'll take a few years. And if you raise your hand and say, excuse me, sir, the mortgage is due first of the month, and I got a car payment and 4 kids. What do I do till then? Oh, have no fear. You can get another job. Where? That's where I'm coming from all the time. So that's, again, my hypothesis is that the professors, remarkably, are getting beat up by advertising men, merchants of doubt.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up with you in this conversation, because, and I don't know if you've seen that movie, but there's a book and a movie that's called Merchants of Doubt, and it discusses exactly what you're saying, that it really comes down to the people who are sharing the message. And Big Oil has hired a lot of very skilled PR people to spread their message, and it's been very impactful in our country, and it's led a lot of people to doubt the science that exists and the science that 97% of climate scientists believe. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good hypothesis on your part.
I was watching the morning news this morning, and there were senators and congressmen from oil and gas states talking about the jobs being lost. Who do you think they're talking to? Now, you can blame Trump supporters. A lot of people want to blame Trump supporters because they're morons or this, that, and the other thing, or they intentionally believe lies. Nobody intentionally believes a lie. Think about that for a minute. Nobody intentionally, and Trump was a liar. So the question comes down to, who do we want to believe? And of course, emotionally, we're going to come down on the side of our families and our jobs, and in all the things I just mentioned. But already they're out there. The oil and gas people are out there saying this will cost thousands of jobs. This is what Joe Biden did, and this will haunt Biden. Biden did this in a strictly partisan matter. I know, and this will haunt him his entire term. Whether he's a one-termer or a two-termer, I doubt he'll be a two-termer, but maybe he will be a two-termer. But this will be a flashpoint forever, as far as Joe Biden is concerned.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that another component of it that makes it more difficult for people to grasp is that it's somewhat intangible. I think that there isn't any really direct piece of it that we're seeing on the day-to-day that makes us think like, oh yeah, I can tell it's real because I see this thing. It's sort of creeping in, and it's a lot of what we see is just statistics from scientists, but it's all working towards a point that we don't really want to get to, and we will see and feel the impacts on a daily basis. So I think that's part of what the challenge is in my mind, and also that it's sort of a multifaceted thing. It's not just like when we were depleting the ozone, it's like, okay, we need to stop using CFCs. With climate change, it's like, all right, it's our cars, and it's how we get energy, and it's our buildings, and it's just so multifaceted that it's daunting. And so it's easier for us to stick our heads in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist than actually start making moves towards addressing it.
Well, again, you're talking about electric cars who would get an electric charge, drive 60 miles, it'd be out of battery then, and you better hope at the end of that 60-mile drive that there's a charging station there. You know how many charging stations are up and down Interstate 80? I haven't seen one yet, but perhaps there are. So professors have a tendency to speak futuristically, and that's terrific. But again, they're losing the bare bones of the argument. They're losing people because they're scaring people, frankly. They don't intend to. They're trying to save them, I know. And I know all the professors are intelligent enough to know this, but they really got to hire a better salesman. Bill Clinton, wow, he was a great salesman. Ronald Reagan, again, a great salesman. I do want to bring up, and maybe you know this, when I was real young, everybody smoked. I mean, and nobody complained. Everybody smoked. Well, it's accepted that cigarette smoke in the air or cigarette smokers aren't doing themselves or anybody else any good. But at the time, it was a social custom. Probably in the early 50s, there was a cancer scare, they called it, that there was some information that cigarette smoking caused cancer. And immediately, the cigarette companies hired spokesman who could sell cigarettes. Oh, don't worry about this. Don't worry about it. And there's still some old commercials. Well, by the mid 60s, a study had been done showing that cigarette smoking did not cause cancer and did not cause lung disease. Now, the people who did that study were top people in their field. They were medical people. They were professors of all kinds. It was later found out that they were paid by the cigarette companies to lie. People like me don't forget that. How many advocacy studies are out there? I talked with a guy by the name of David Osterberg. He's an instructor down near the University of Iowa here, and he's a real climate change guy. But he and I have talked about the loss of faith in the truth. And that's a line that's been crossed already, I'm afraid. We cannot agree on the truth at all because there's been, frankly, too much BS. I'm sorry, I'm doing all the talking. You jump right in, Jenna, if you, for whatever questions you may have. Or
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I guess people who are listening can't see this, but I've been nodding along with everything you have to say because I totally agree with you. And I think losing the truth is an incredibly dangerous path because we're just setting ourselves up to have a very confusing future where it's going to be impossible for us to have faith in politicians or in the media or in one another. So I think you made a lot of really good points. And I'm curious to kind of pick your brain a little bit more on some of these topics that we've already brought up. And I know that when we spoke the other day, you mentioned that you're not a total climate change denier. So
No.
I was just curious if there are some components that you're more skeptical of and what components you agree with on more so.
I would disagree with the sometimes hysterical tone of climate change people. I've been around long enough and I've been in the communications business long enough to know that sometimes a hysterical, highly emotional tone works. I look at MSNBC regularly, not to listen to what they have to say, because I really don't agree with them, but they're very emotional, and that emotion comes through the screen. They don't lose control, but they're great performers, and so are the people over at Fox News. So is MSNBC and Fox News giving us the news, or they give us something else? Well, what they're doing is selling. They're advertising salesmen. They have to get them enough numbers out there, enough ears, enough eyes, so we can take it to a major advertiser like General Motors and say, look at all these ears and eyes we have. And General Motors will go, well, who are your listeners? And then we'll get into psychographics and all these other things. But that's the deal. And Fox News will do the same thing, you know. Let me give you the facts, you know, and then they won't tell the truth, you know. In what's my favorite? Gosh, frankly, the truth is, yeah, something like that. Well, and then it'll go on to say something that's a bunch of baloney. Newt Gingrich, when he was still around, used to kill me, and I met Mr. Gingrich a couple of times. Very sharp guy, but he'd get out there and say, frankly, the truth is, and then no, he wouldn't tell me the truth at all, or tell us the truth. But again. I hate to. I know that this is serious work that the climate change people are doing, and I'm going to respond to your question a little bit more directly as to what do I believe really is happening with climate change. But this crucial work, if that's how the climate change people see it, needs a lot better salespeople. They lean in. They should stop being on specific networks. Like, if I was a climate change advocate, I wouldn't appear on MSNBC. I'd appear on Fox News. And I'd be ready for those guys because I know what they're going to do and I know what they're going to say. And they're going to cop an attitude of scorn, of slight scorn. And frankly, I'd call them out about that. Hey, I see your attitude here. Don't do that. These are the scientific facts and you have nothing to come back with. Nobody's doing that. As to what I believe in climate change, of course, pollutants. So we've had over 100 years of cars in this country. They have to affect the climate. They have to affect ozone. Wild statements in the past haven't helped anything, and I would refer to Al Gore and his movie, The Inconvenient Truth. Senator Gore got a little carried, Vice President Gore got a little carried away a couple of times. That doesn't help. You got to give them the straight business because they'll catch you every time. And of course, Inconvenient Truth has been picked apart. And a lot of people don't believe any of it. And actually, the vice president gave a really decent presentation on climate change and where we're at with it. But predictions that we were all going to die 10 years ago don't, they damage the cause, if that's what you're looking for, is to get more people interested in doing something about climate change. And there has to be something for ordinary people to do other than just sit and do what they're told. How do we actively get involved in climate change in ways that will improve our lives? How? Jenna, do you know? Because I haven't heard too many people talking about it,
Well, I think that's where I feel very conflicted, because the things that are actually feasible in our day-to-day lives, things like recycling and driving less and carpooling and things like that, which, yes, that's all important. And I think that definitely, those are changes we should be making. And at the same time, this needs to be a systemic change, and it needs to incorporate where we get our energy and our entire infrastructure. So we can do things on a small scale, but really a lot of this needs to be like large scale, massive changes in how we live our lives.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. But how do we do that? I don't, Joe Biden and his climate change people aren't going to be able to govern. There's an equal split in the country, pretty close. They aren't going to be able to govern if they just want to smash people in the face and say, I signed an executive order today, or something like that. You have to persuade people. And I don't think it's that hard. But the politics have gotten so angry, and you got to go read some of the Facebook posts that your Uncle Scott and I have posted over the years, because Scott's a liberal and I'm not. And by the way, I think Scott Buchanan's a great guy. However, we get on Facebook and it's something else, or Twitter or whatever. There's just a lot of angry nonsense. As far as, again, my feeling on climate change, yes, it's happening. I don't really know, sitting here, how fast it is. I find myself resistant to the idea of climate change legislation, because I think those are people in a different class who don't know people like me and really don't care what I think, and they don't care about my life, despite their assurances that they do. I'm here to save the world. You're just going to be out of a job for 5 years. I mean, do you want that, Jenna? I mean, because I don't.
I agree with you on that, and I also think that we kind of need to have this foundation of legislation to force changes, because there's no doubt that if we keep barreling down this path, then we're setting ourselves up for a very challenging future. So I kind of see policy as the foundation to start implementing these changes and sort of get us going on it, because otherwise it's so much easier to stick with the status quo. But if that's what we've done in the past, before we had some of these environmental policies, then right now we potentially would be losing a lot more endangered species. We wouldn't be analyzing our impacts on the environment before starting new projects. So I think that legislation can play a role in it. And I agree that it's hard to trust people in Washington to have your best interest at heart. But at the end of the day, there will be impacts on people. And the question is, are we going to try and get ahead of it and make things sort of tough right now as we switch to this new industry? Or are we going to wait until things are so bad that we're just in this kind of chaotic state anyways?
Now you're trying to scare me. When are things going to get so bad that this chaotic scene or chaotic atmosphere appears on my front doorstep? Can you give me a timestamp on that? Or
I guess what I think is silly is that there's no way of truly knowing that. And I know that in the past, I think that fear tactic hasn't really worked, because they have scientists and representatives that said, by 2020 or by 2030, this is going to be submerged and this and that. But what we've been discussing a lot this past semester is that climate change is a wicked problem, meaning there isn't one simple solution. This is something that's so complex that as much as we can model what's going to happen and as much as we can estimate when things are going to get really bad, we can't. And I'm kind of the viewpoint of I don't want to find out. I would rather start now and make changes so we don't have to ever hit that point like, oh, here it is. Like, this is when it's getting really crazy like we thought it would. But in my mind, there's just no future for fossil fuels on this planet. Burning these fuels is so terrible for us that we just have to start moving away from that, and the sooner the better.
Well, I just had a pop-up here on my computer screen, and it's from the Daily Caller. Now, that's Tucker Carlson, and it's a conservative site, but he's probably reporting the truth when he says that Biden's energy nominee sent millions in taxpayer funds to energy startups that went bankrupt. So somebody's paying Tucker because he's not saying these things, or he's not bringing this up for no reason. And it's not that big a news story. Big deal. I mean, I don't even know who Biden's energy nominee is. I could care less. But anyway, have I answered your questions? I kind of said a little prayer on the way out here. Please don't make me look stupid. So I don't think I have.
Yeah, you definitely have. I think it's interesting that a lot of what you don't believe with climate change is just the tactics that people are employing to prove their point. So meaning that there's this like hysteria around it. So it's interesting that that's sort of like swayed your opinion of climate change just because of how people are presenting it.
Don't dismiss that the communication part of it. You may be someone who just looks at the science and say, there it is. Absolute positive proof. All I have to do is wander among the citizens of San Diego with a scroll of all the bad things that's going to happen with climate change. No, I mean, these things, these debates, this salesmanship, if you will, changes the world one way or the other. I mean, Adolf Hitler, and God, the worst human being who ever lived, was a great communicator. And he plunged the world into a murderous chaos for years. If they would have had someone else better in Germany in the 1930s, we wouldn't have had a World War II, but they didn't. They had this murderer. I'm convinced that climate change legislation may pass, but I don't have a lot of confidence. And you may be right. The science may be there right down to the last equation. But if you don't sell it better, and again, that's a very important thing. If you don't sell it better, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right on that.
You can be right and never win.
It's true. So I guess something I've been curious about is if you think that politicians have an agenda that believe in climate change science. Let's see.
Thank you. Do they have an agenda? Certainly. Millions in dollars of contributions to their campaigns. I'll tell you, we have so many old politicians. Nancy Pelosi's 80. Chuck Schumer's my age, and that's old. Mitch McConnell's way up there. Joe Biden's 78. They don't want to give up that juice. They don't want to give up that power. And by the way, a lot of people think the climate change argument, and this is coming from the oil and gas states, of course, is a way to transfer money from Texas and Louisiana to California, because Nancy Pelosi and the source of a lot of her money is big climate change people who are ready to jump on the bandwagon as soon as the right legislation is passed. They have a lot of money to invest in the infrastructure of, say, wind energy or any number of green projects. But and that plays to Nancy Pelosi's self-interest. And it certainly plays to the self-interest of the oil and gas people to have people believe that sort of nonsense. Well, I should say to not believe in the science. So this got tied up in politics a long time ago. It turned out to be a threat both to the car manufacturers and the oil and gas industry. And I always feel a little bit sorry for liberal college professors there on the They're on the wrong. How should I say this? They don't get the game. They come out and say, "Here's the truth. I've got it all figured out right here. Me and my colleagues, we all agree. Here it is, the truth of the matter." And they get yelled out of the auditorium because nobody wants to believe them. They've already been told other things, like cigarette smoking is okay. And here I am, Professor Horatio Hornblower, and I've got a paper here that says cigarette smoking doesn't cause cancer. The cigarette companies made money for 30 some years, lots of it worldwide, because of that study. It wasn't until the early 90s, when the first George Bush was president, that something was actually done. And don't think that the oil and gas companies don't see that. And don't think that they don't look back over their shoulder and say, we've been pumping this garbage for a long time. We've made a lot of money. All we got to do is keep doing it.
Right.
I know I'm a terrible cynic, but that's the way it is from where I'm.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I definitely hear you. And I kind of want to circle back to something we were talking about earlier with the job market, and that I think a big fear for people that aren't interested in believing in climate change is that if their job is within the fossil fuels realm, then they're going to lose their source of income. So I'm curious if you think that's going to be one of the bigger impediments to switching over to renewables and gaining support for that.
I actually went to college for sales and marketing. And one of the first things I learned is when you're going out to an advertiser or a potential advertiser, you talk about three things: home, hearth, and pocketbook. You talk about where that advertiser or his customers live, what's going on in their home, their hearth, that's their family, and their pocketbook. The pocketbook is third for a reason, because all they care about is taking care of the home and the hearth. So that's the argument that has to be made. Here, I'm a climate change, I'm a proponent for climate change legislation, and I'm going to talk to you about home, hearth, and pocketbook. I don't know how such smart people miss this, because they are brilliant people, I understand. Those who advocate for climate change legislation, for the most part, are brilliant people, but they're not getting it. I don't know if they think they can just go to, if they want to just bypass ordinary people and get legislation passed and kind of shoving it down the people's throat, or what. But they've been operating mainly through political figures. And I think there should be a grassroots education that should have been going on for 25 years. And I don't really see it.
So what, in your mind, what would you do different if you were on their side and you're trying to build support and you've seen that maybe they haven't taken the right route? What do you think they should do instead of that?
I would, again, see the need for a grassroots organization rather than just a hammer of legislation. But I'm not Joe Biden. I would, I'd be in schools and libraries and in small universities and colleges all over the place. I think the battle has been won at the university level, the intelligentsia, if you will, or the young people in college. The battle is won, but they're not everybody in the country. And you have to remember that Joe Biden got 78 million votes and Donald Trump got 74. So it's not like you can do this and the only people who are complaining is this tiny little minority over here, because it's nearly 50%. And that's staggering. I couldn't believe Trump I couldn't believe Trump got elected in the first place. But then when he got that many votes, hey, I was really surprised. Did I wander off in the woods again, or did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that grassroots has a place in all of this, and and that brings to mind Sierra Club and Greenpeace and Sunrise Movement. These grassroots entities do exist, and they are doing what they can to get young people involved.
Right.
And I think for myself, part of what I've seen and struggle with is that I think that my parents' generation is of the mindset of like, well, you know, there's like nothing we can do. We're getting older, and this is going to be on your generation to solve. And that's really challenging for me to see, because my generation isn't in power. We're not the ones calling the shots yet. All of the CEOs of private industry and all of the government leaders are older than us, and they're in this next generation that's already passed the baton to us. So I think that grassroots can play a role in creating this movement and getting people involved and aware. But I kind of think that we need this starting at the top and just infiltrating through society that way.
Okay. You know, I think that's a strong point. I really do. To finish up, you have to get some people, and I'm retiring, by the way. I'm going to retire this year. I have a good feeling. You have to get some people in, some entertaining people to be on the radio. Talk radio played a big part in defeating climate change legislation. And if you listen to if you get a text of what Rush Limbaugh says, he's not saying that much. It's the way he says it. Again, it's the communication thing. So I'd find somebody or a couple of people who can do that, who has a good sense of humor. Because right now, the cultural left is the most serious group of boring people I've ever met in my life, you know, and I grew up with some of them. Will you lighten up? Let's have a good time here. Let's lighten up a little bit, you know, instead of running around like the sky is falling. But they're going to be grim, I guess. They've chosen to be grim. I guess there's nothing else you could do. But you're right about this top-down thing to an extent. But you can't govern people who don't want to be governed by you. Are we out of time?
No, I was just getting another call.
Oh, okay. But no, I would certainly. Most great changes have started at the grassroots level. There's been a top-down change with recent changes to our culture, like gay rights was top-down. I mean, there was no cry from the grassroots to have gay marriage, but it happened by the judges imposed it, and I think that other groups who would like to see their cause move forward saw that as a learning example, that we can get the judges interested in our cause, and the judge will just change the law. And that might be one of the ways to go. I don't know. The judges are a little cowed now, and we have a totally different Supreme Court. So I don't know.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges that we face as a country is that we're all living in our own silos, and maybe getting in front of people who don't believe in climate change would be the best way to share information, get through them, and have the best PR person possible. But it seems to me that the people listening to Rush Limbaugh, like, that's their silo, and they're not switching over to a more progressive radio show to hear the other side. And Rush Limbaugh isn't going to be the person who's sharing with them, like, we should be recycling and things like that. So
Rush? No. and you'll never get a Rush Limbaugh. I mean, you won't get the Rush Limbaugh, but you need somebody like him. And Limbaugh's got kind of a sense of humor. He's always got the tongue-in-cheek thing going on. And he's maddeningly effective to a lot of people.
Right.
In 1994, for example, Bill Clinton was elected in 1992. And he had a rough couple of years because he'd just previously been the governor of Arkansas, a very small state, and the country was getting away from Bill Clinton. Well, one of the reasons it is because Rush Limbaugh was on the air constantly. Now, in 1994, Clinton lost 50 seats in the House of Representatives, the first time since the late 1940s. that the Democrats had not been in control of the House of Representatives. But most people gave Rush Limbaugh credit, and listen to me, for changing the complexion of the House of Representatives and the direction of the country. This is a talk show host who went to 2 years of community college in Southwest Missouri. You know, this isn't an educated man, and he changed the course of our country. I mean, I was staggered. I thought that was really something.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. One person can wield so much power just through their audience.
Yes, and he can, and he does. I don't think he has the influence that he does anymore. And I regret to say he's a very sick man, and he's not expected to live much longer. That's no cause for anybody to cheer. But I know he's had his furious distractors over the years, to say the very, very least. And but you have to stand back and learn a lesson from what he's done. There's always a lesson in practically everything. There's a lesson in the Limbaugh thing. There is a lesson to be made from the gay marriage argument, that we should convince the judges that there is somehow a constitutional reason that we should enact climate change legislation. I have no idea what it is. Ask your uncle. I don't know. I don't know how that would work. But again, heart, home, and pocketbook, or that's a way to change people's minds. I think that they do. Really, the oil companies, does anybody like them? Because they don't. But they've got a hold on us, and they're not letting go. And one of the holes is, there's two of them. One is we've always done it this way. We've always had gas-fueled cars, and it'll be bad if you don't. It'll be really bad because those climate change people are from California or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I guess something that's interesting that I've heard recently is that there has been a lot of public pressure on some of these energy companies to start moving away from using fossil fuels. And I know at least one, I think it's Tri-State, they've actually switched so that 50% of their energy is coming from wind and solar now. So I think there are some promising changes that are taking place, and I just hope that everyone gets on board pretty quickly, because there genuinely is just no future in fossil fuels. It's a finite resource. Even if it wasn't creating these problems with climate change, we don't have an endless supply. So the most logical thing to do is invest in renewable energy and whoever gets on top of that, there's a lot of money to be made in that industry. So I hope that that's sort of the vision that these companies are starting to create for themselves.
I hope so. Question always is, who's going to make the money? John Cronin's constituents in Texas, or Nancy Pelosi's constituents in California? I don't care. I don't have a dog. Neither one of them are I don't get Christmas cards from either one of them. So there's a number of ways out there, but clearly what the climate change people are doing now isn't necessarily working. We'll see what Biden does. We'll see how Biden's approach, and his man hasn't even been president for 3 weeks yet, but maybe maybe his approach will be successful. I've been wrong before, believe me. I never thought Ronald Reagan would be elected president. What, that guy on television? Not a chance. Ta-da, he was president. And when Donald Trump was after the nomination, I thought, yeah, right. As a matter of fact, I went to bed early the night of the 2016 election, knowing that Hillary Clinton was going to be our president. Yeah, well, what do I know? What do I know?
But I mean, there are a lot of curveballs recently, so
there have been.
Hopefully we can. I don't know. In my mind, I just don't see the benefit in denying climate change science, and I get that it's frightening and it is something that's tough to come to terms with. And I also hope that we can use all of that to just start changing our mindset towards our planet and how we're treating it and how we're using resources, and sort of just develop a new way of life. It's not something that's a bipartisan thing. We should all be on board with wanting to protect our planet.
Yeah, that sounds great. How are you going to do it?
Well, if someone has the answer to that, then they're going to make a lot of money.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I would get back to heart, home, and pocketbook. That argument isn't being made.
Yeah. I guess what's interesting to me to observe is, I don't know if you're familiar with Greta Thunberg. She's this teenager in Sweden who's really put herself in the spotlight as this advocate for believing in climate change science and pushing governments to make changes. And I've seen a lot of cartoons where there's all these adults that are like, nice work, we're giving you this honor, this award for what you've done, and then nothing changes.
That's right.
It's tough. I mean, there are a lot of people who are compelling and that have an audience, and it's still not enough to create change.
Well, the idea that a 13-year-old girl from Norway or Sweden or wherever she's from should come over here and start angrily lecturing us probably isn't the way to go. I wouldn't recommend that or suggest that, necessarily. But maybe you thought it was more effective. You're of a completely different generation, and
yeah, I think it was just very honest. Like, this is someone who's young, and in my view, I think she was just she made a lot of sense. The fact that, and also she is young, and there's a lot of complexities of the world that maybe she wasn't privy to yet. But as a 13-year-old, to be like, yeah, once I saw all these statistics and read these figures and heard what was going on, I was amazed that we weren't doing anything. And like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I'm kind of amazed too.
Well, she's being used, though. There are climate change people behind her. I don't think her parents funded a tour for her overseas and then to tour the United States. Somebody pays for that, and I'm sure it's climate change people.
Right. Well, and I think now that's definitely what it's turned into. But when she first was an advocate, that it was totally on her own. She didn't have anyone backing her. She just woke up and was like, how is this happening? How are we not doing anything about it? And she took it upon herself to become this 13-year-old advocate. And it's true that now I'm sure she's backed by certain organizations that have their agenda, but I think her message is still an important one. And I think she also speaks for this generation that is going to live with this for the rest of their lives. And that's the point she's trying to prove, is that, like, this is like my life that's going to be impacted by this. And I've talked to 15-year-olds that already are facing a lot of anxiety around what the future might look like for them. So it's a challenging topic. And I think that it's also really hard on young people to get all of this news and information and have this future painted for them that looks really scary, and see that there's a lot of inaction going on.
Jenna Lynch is our guest here, and I'm her guest actually as well. Is there anything else we need to talk about? I wish I had better answers for you, but I do think that certainly something needs to be done. What it is, I don't know, and how to do it, I don't even know. So, and the reason I don't, Jenna, is not because I don't read, because I read extensively every single day. And I'm fairly good at comprehending things. I can be educated, but I haven't seen anybody do that yet. No one has really given a definitive answer. When's this going to happen? Well, again, Al Gore got in trouble with that too. It'll happen in 5 years. We're all going to burn up, and here we are.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So, anything else?
Your insights and answers, and I think that yeah, it's definitely been an interesting conversation.
All right, Jenna, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
All right, say hello to your Uncle Scott for me, and I'll if you want, I can send you the MP. I think I can send it to you. We kind of ran a long time. Maybe it's too big a file to send it to you by email, but I'll try to think of something.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Hey, thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.